like multi-user dungeon type things.
I'm Tom Brown. I'm a software developer. I dig the indie web and multiplayer games.
I'm Charles Anahan. I am a data scientist by day, but I really like the online distributed networks, like Scuttlebutt and stuff. So I'm interested in learning more about it.
I'm Josh. I work at Pillar Project. I'm trying to work on decentralized projects because I love them to bits, and I think it's the way forward.
Trent Larson. I'm a programmer from Utah. Love decentralization, Bitcoin, property rights.
Joe Andrew, requirements guy, and I work on some open standards, and way back in the day had a company that was doing online games.
Cool. Let's get back there. Okay.
I built the web solution called UWAS, which is self-hosted, being self-hosted. And one of the things that we're around there is
Oh, excellent. Let's talk more.
Dan Burnett, Web and Internet Standards Consultant, one of the chairs of the Verifiable Claims Working Group at W3C, and this just looked interesting.
Cool. So, Dimitri has joined us. Yeah, absolutely.
Dimitri,
so
am I allowed to record you?
So this is being recorded, just so you know. Is that okay?
Yep. So I'm Alan Cart. I don't play games other than chess. I don't write games. I like learning about problems, very hard to solve access control problems. And I like learning about what they are and how to solve them.
Great.
Some Dimitri Zabulon, decentralized software developer, worked for a number of years at MIT on Timber, pretty solid project. After that, Media Lab on decentralized identity project, so I'm sort of steeped in this industry, and I'm currently freelancing, working with Weber here actually,
Yeah, you can sit down.
and I very much am interested in both multiplayer online games and hard technical problems.
We're doing introductions, Christopher. By the way, we're being recorded. Is that okay with you? Okay.
Yes.
So, do you want to do an introduction to yourself and how you?
Sure. I'm not going to talk anything about identity for a minute. So, in 1999, I was prohibited from being in the security industry and from cryptocurrencies and a couple other things. So, the most interesting work that was being done in that area was being done in games. So, created a software company, created a sort of an online economy for something called Story Points. I met Joe in a list called MudDev, which had some of the most advanced thinkers. Some of the most advanced thinkers on early what is a virtual economy. Out of that came Second Life, EverQuest, Star Wars Online, all the majors. And my company's still around. I just made a whole bunch of our proprietary software open source because it's been 20 years. I guess it's time.
Very good.
Never realized you were that much around. So exciting.
So,
It's a good list.
we have everyone except Manu, but Manu is not part of this presentation this morning because I ran it by him. So I'm going to say let's just move ahead in the interest of time. I don't know. I didn't see him around today. Did you see him?
I haven't seen him today.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hoping he'd show up for this, but oh well. So yeah.
Kind of invented this whole industry.
Right. Habitat appears in here. So massively multiplayer online secure environments, the only logical conclusion to our work. Let's find out why that bold statement is true. So we're talking about, a lot of us here are working on decentralized identifiers for self-control, right? We want to make DIDs usable in some sort of way. We not only want to make them usable, we also want to incentivize humans to actually use them. Like, what's the motivation for you to go through the extra effort? Hello, welcome. to pick up and use. By the way, this is being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, you can stay behind there and not talk. Otherwise, I'll welcome. So we want to be able to incentivize students to use them. So actually rebooting the Web of Trust. So here's a failed version of the Web of Trust is key signing parties, right? Surely everybody around here agrees that key signing parties haven't worked, won't work. But we have a successful almost Web of Trust already in social networks, right? Logging on and following somebody is kind of an indication that you trust that person. You're kind of naturally building out a Web of Trust in that way, right? So we actually have people using a Web of Trust-like mechanism without any of the security properties of Web of Trust, but we could introduce those, right? And we have a distributed social networking system. I'm biased. I work on it. It's called the ActivityPub. And it even has over 1 million users through Mastodon and other implementers of the ActivityPub. All right. So Zuko's triangle. Is anybody here not familiar with Zuko's triangle? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, we'll review it. So the Zuko's triangle says that that names can have 2 properties out of 3: decentralized, secure, globally unique, and human meaningful. Pick 2, and DIDS decided to pick decentralized and globally unique. So what does that mean about the fact that we didn't involve human meaningfulness in our names, right? How can humans use them? So this is a quote from last Rebooting Web of Trust from Mark Miller that I really like. If we ever show a DID to a user, we have failed. So I think that's a pretty bold statement, and I like bold statements. So what can we do about it? So there's something called pet names, which if you've got a contact list on your phone, you probably have, like a contact list for, maybe one of your parents or, any one of your friends, right? And there's no assumption that even though you have something that's a little bit gobbledygooky, not quite as gobbledygooky as DIDs, like that are phone numbers. What? Right. And so you may be able to map your mom to this type of number. There's no assumption that your mom is the world's mom, right? It's your mom, right? But there's also something called edge names, which are how you may recommend others. So maybe Christopher Allen has me, Chris Weber, listed as Chris Weber in his contact list, but he wants to get a hold of Manu, who he doesn't have in his list. I may be able to give my recommendation as an edge kind of in this graph of who Manu Sporny is, and then thus Chris will be able to find him, because Chris would probably believe that I would tell you.
I just want to point out that your phone contact list is not pet names, because you can have multiple aliases connected to the same number.
That's right. It's pet names like though, right? It helps the metaphor quite a bit.
But it's only the metaphor.
Right.
Pet names are strictly one-to-one.
Right. So anybody in this system can be a naming hub. The way that I was kind of a naming hub there, right? We're used to DNS filling that role for everyone, but DNS can just become an equal participant. DNS, we could have DNS arrow dustycloud.org, and that's how you can find my website. But DNS is just an equal participant out of every participant in this system.
There's another point here, that the man who's Sporny he's trying to reach may not be the man who's Sporny that you have in your contact.
Right. So it's a recommendation that it probably is, right? But if Christopher called that Manu this morning and he's like, I'm a completely different Manu, then you would not save him as a pet name. Presumably, if you did, you would actually, bookmark that Manu and then you'd know who that is for the future, right?
And we built the system was based on that assumption that it wasn't going to be the same.
Right. So back to social networks, following a friend is establishing a certain amount of trust. So when you follow a friend, you could set a pet name for them, right? You could do that as part of that system. You could also set an edge name, which is probably usually the same thing, but in the case of your mom, you might not.
I prefer it on these type of things. I prefer to be called Tenebrass and it's a game.
Right.
Whereas I prefer Christopher A. if it's any of my professional names.
Right. And so the name that you may know somebody as, it may be different, depending on what the world kind of generally knows. So you can give an edge name to recommend other people know that person by. And you can build up pet names as a natural side effect of using a social network, right? So problem number 1 is browsers, right? Everybody here, we talk about, did colon blah, 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 somebody's got it on this thing. Now the number 1, we also often talk about replacing DIDs in a certain sense, replace both DNS and SSL certificate authorities. But that type of statement makes it sound like we really want to use it for, browsing the web, potentially, at least as one use case. But browsers are the most desirable because they're the most used and also the worst target. So here's something called the line of death. There's other names for it, but I like that name because it's so bold. It says, beneath this area, you can't trust anything. And even and that's not quite true.
That's
but
right.
beneath the address bar is the only thing you can believe. Example.com. Anything beneath there, it's actually the browser itself is telling you what that is, right? If you try
The page.
the page itself. Yeah, sorry, I misspoke. The page itself has complete control over that. So you may even believe you're about to go to a certain link, and then it can replace it. So we'd like to put pet names.
Technically, your first statement was correct.
Well, it was also correct.
I mean, that's
It's also the browser is also in charge at the top as well.
That's
right.
right.
There's a layer of that there too, right? But we can't get browsers to be able to incorporate pet names as we might like, right? Maybe you would want to have an extension that has your social network on a web page that you're visiting, and it actually shows the pet names you know. And we can't make that happen because there's too much control for a good reason. For browsers are shoot features out first and then ask security questions later type environment. So, for the reason that, lots of people want to be able to style things and stuff. But we can't trust anything beneath there, so what can we do? So this was a suggestion. There's something called the pet name tool, which is an outdated browser extension, and this is a very low resolution screenshot of it. But what's kind of cool about it is you see to the left of the URL, it's like, well, bookmarks are basically pet names. A bookmark is a pet name. So why not just have actually the bookmark appear up there next to it, and then that way you can, even if you have did:/gobbledygook, you can have that be part of your infrastructure. So that sounds great. So the problem is we can't even trust any of this anymore because of HTML5. HTML5 allows browsers to actually change this address bar because it was convenient for certain applications. Unfortunately, it's kind of a pretty shitty situation.
Is this your graphic?
No, so these are from, I have the link down there, but it's very tiny.
That's fine.
Text/claimed. If you search for the line of death.
I'll withhold my feedback because it's not relevant.
Okay, I didn't make it, but if you search for the line of death, then you'll find the page on which the person, has these graphics. So the second problem that we have is insufficient motivation. So I work on decentralized social networks, and I've been working on them for years. What's the main problem? Is it's not just for decentralized, but what's the motivation to switch to them, right? So
my friends aren't on them. This is
right, and saying it's decentralized, that's a feature. Most people don't give a shit about that, right? Saying it's decentralized, is not going to be enough of a rallying cry to get people on a network. And it's also control yourself is not going to be enough of a motivator for DIDs. All of the reasons that we talk about human rights and stuff like that are the good, right reasons to have the infrastructure be that way, but they aren't enough motivation for people to actually switch over because people are lazy, and it's a very large amount of effort to switch something that's mostly what they already have over to something kind of more different. So that sounds very depressing, I'm going to make it more depressing. So here's an XKCD comic I like where somebody says, if you learn to speak LodgeBand, your communication will be completely unambiguous and logical. Yeah, but then it would only be with the kind of person who speaks LodgeBand, right? So if you join a decentralized social network, you get to talk to a lot of people who like decentralized social networks, and that's kind of it's cool, but maybe you want to connect to more people.
The asking quotient is above average.
Right, yes. So maybe we could trick users into joining something because we can do something that the other systems can't. So let's rewind back. So the lost world of social games. So this is an example of a text-based. Who here has played a mud, a moo, or a bush? Raise your hand. So a good chunk of the room, not everybody. So these are text-based type games. They're kind of like a social network, kind of like IRC or Slack, except that there's a sense of place. When you say, I pick up a drink and drink it, that can that you were holding will no longer have liquid in it or something like that. You can do things. You can hit a goblin. You can do whatever, and the world changes around you. So what's cool about this is that this is a text-based interface. This is one interface, but one nice thing about it is that it's a very low barrier to entry. You don't have to do any 3D modeling. You don't have to whatever. You just have to write some text, which is a pretty low barrier to entry to start creating. Though, even before Muds, Moos, and Bushes, this is what you mentioned. This is something called, and now we just blinked on the name, Habitat, right, it's right there, which in 1985 was written on Commodore 64s, was a massively multiplayer game where people would connect to each other, had graphics, and they could communicate with each other and interact with the world. So this kind of stuff nobody does on social networks today, right? It's not this cool.
Randy Farmer just released an open source version.
That's right. So you can go.
We could start with that.
So it's called, actually I forget exactly the name of it, but if you search for Habitat game, you can find it. Habitat LucasArts, I found the new version. I think it's Neo Habitat. But anyway, you can find it again. But so these things are semi-lost to time, but they have some properties that we don't have. And what's also interesting, so this is an article from AT&T Research. There were a few that what's easy to forget is that there was a time before the web really took off where people thought that these online cyberpunky worlds were going to actually be the future, and then that didn't happen. And part of the reason it didn't happen is the web took off and things got a lot more
Part of
documented.
the reason why it happened was because Second Life happened. Was quite putting a whole bunch of visual stuff on things turned out not quite to be as valuable as people thought it was going to be.
Right. So, but what's cool about this document, I encourage you to read it, it's a Network Desiderata, is that it describes a ton of the stuff that we want to do, but it's for distributed games. And this was in 1997. So what's also interesting is that most of our tech that we're working on at this conference comes out of games. So object capabilities came out of one of the world's biggest things called electric communities, and E is the language that came out of that, and E is where most of our modern object capability understanding comes from. So if you try thinking about these problems, you end up developing all the right solutions.
So I like to refer to E as the second most influential language that nobody programs in. Liskoff's Clue is number one. Clue. Liskoff is number one. But E has been a very influential language.
Go back one page like this one.
So what's also cool is, so smart contracts also came out of this space. So if you look on the E website, you see smart contracts suggested, and this looks very GeoCities-esque, and it is a very GeoCities-esque website because it's, a lot of these ideas are pretty old. But but what's interesting on there is they have smart contracts for financial transactions, and then also smart contracts for distributed games. So if you start thinking about this stuff, you start developing the right solutions. Virtual currencies, as Christopher Allen said, the reason he was working on a game was because it was the best way for you to work on virtual currencies. That's what you've told me at least, right? And so many times we've reinvented things like the actor model and other programming things over and over again, because just trying to build this damn thing means that you end up inventing all the right solutions. All right, so here's one of the most interesting things though, is this is actually an open source version of the most popular game in the world, but you probably recognize it as the most popular game in the world, Minecraft, right? This is actually Minetest. But, Minecraft is hugely popular, right? Insanely popular. And why is it so popular? It's not because the graphics are great, they aren't, right? It's because you can build shit in it, right? You can build shit so easily, right? And that's not too unlike MUDs, being able to build stuff in text and stuff like that.
And even more, you learn how to do things from your friends.
Right, and you learn how to do things
And
from your
all
friends.
the extra special things you got to talk to your friends.
That's
Did you
right.
know how to make such and such?
Exactly. So it has a social component to it as well. So it has building and a social component, which is really cool. And what's interesting about that is that, so how many people do you know host a federated social network? Probably not that many. Yeah, okay. And how many people do you know have hosted a Minecraft server? Tons of people. Kids host Minecraft servers. We can't get people to host our own shit, but they host Minecraft servers, right? That's interesting. We should learn from that. So maybe we could have a game as an entry point. So here's a little mock-up. So I put a few tabs on here. Here you see some people talking in kind of a classic MUD-like interface. There's different tabs at the top for different things. You see people talking in the game. Right now I have it so that there's an interface where you can select between chat and doing actions just for people to be lazy. But you can see the people in the room and the place that you're in and the things that are happening, right? The game, I've got several tabs up here. So there's the game tab, which is this game stream that you're on. Now, I only said game here just for the sake of intellectual simplicity, but you could have a lot of games open, right? You could have many realms that are connected to. And if you have a DID, this is one of the big complaints about MUDs, right? Your identity couldn't span domains, right? If you have a DID, you could have an identifier that actually could span multiple domains, right? Maybe your avatar would be different in the different worlds, but you could at least have an avatar that would work in different domains. So that's interesting. I also have a social tab, so that you could have a Twitter-like, Facebook-like interface in this same thing, because actually this is not too different, where you could have, the stream of messages that you've got in there. And I've also got Ben up here. This person's talking to their personal friend Ben, which is a direct message thing. So all of those.
We did something called, we had two modes. There was basically mud mode, and then there was chat theater, which is exactly the same, but the interface was different. So
Right.
Chat theater, you just type and it's words, and you have to do special things in order to do actions. Whereas in a mud, you have to do a quote, or I say, or
But the general idea is that there's a way to switch between doing things and then the actions, right? And so it also has a sense of space. You see they're in the tavern, and the tavern's described and stuff like that, right? And they're doing things. So the other tab that I have on here, so the other interesting thing is that you've got these different participants. These could be pet names, right? So this actually could be that you encounter different participants in here, and then you're like, this person's useful, and I know them. I'm going to bookmark that person. And now you've built up your social network, and it's actually represented correctly here. I didn't show specifically how we might represent pet names, so I was being lazy in putting together this interface, but it's definitely possible, and I have mock-ups of that on index cards in my pocket. The last tab that's on here is the browser tab. So this probably sounds crazy. Why would you want a browser tab in here? So, if I told you, hey, download this browser, it's way more secure, and it does all these things it doesn't do all the things you'd like to do. You'd say, fuck that, right? Like, why would I download this browser that doesn't do as much? But if it turns out that I'm like, hey, download this game, it's got the social network environment, it's got all this stuff, and oh, hey, it just happens to, I'm sending you this link inside of the game. You could open it in Firefox, but it would be much more secure to just open it as a tab inside of here. It's not as pretty and stuff like that, but we've only got a subset of the HTML. But you could open it, and this would actually be a secure browser interface.
Nobody's going to care about that. If it's easier, if it's integrated with the game, if the browser knows your game context, then they will be.
Right, so that's one of the things I didn't mention here, is if the browser, one of the things about the browser tab is that it would be able to know your pet names and actually be able to map that into the system. And a lot of the things that we'd like to be able to do, that we have trouble convincing the browser developers to be able to do, like payment polyfills and all sorts of things like that, we could just put in here, right? So that's why I think that this is an interesting way to bootstrap this kind of system. Now I'm done talking. I'm interested in discussion. You got your hand. Let's go.
What status are we talking about here? Is that I'm using episodes, but...
Okay, so, I have written each one of these components separately. I've written a multiplayer MUD. I work on a federated social network thing. I've written an experimental chat interface. All of these things can be built, and I've done them all separately as prototypes. I haven't hooked them all together yet.
What does this mean? Basically a downloadable PC application?
Yeah, sure. So it would be like a desktop application, maybe also a mobile application.
For instance, I have probably one of the most sophisticated text processors of that kind of the end of the MUD era. And but the problem is that there's also it literally was designed with a lot of those things you've done. It would be easy to add OCAP to it. It would be easy to add pet names, all that kind of stuff. But what's happened is that web standards have changed. So we had basically a browser interface to the MUD game. Zool is gone. All these wonderful browser tools that allowed us to do interesting things for the user to go to a web page now require more security. They're not reliable. The streaming doesn't
They
work.
require more security things, but are less secure.
Yes. So, one of the things I'm interested in begin to talk about, so this was for sort of what I call the room model. But I'd be very interested in just simply a protocol that would guarantee ordering.
Sure.
So there's a similar type of thing, which is, okay, I'm moving, I'm in my chess room, I'm moving, I've got a pet name I'm talking to, I'm moving king to rook 5, and, you can't say that I didn't move king to rook 5, you can only attend to that you're doing another move. or that I'm sending 500 missiles from Moscow to DC some kind of missile command.
Well,
But doing it in a way that from the beginning is globally consistent.
Right. It's more interesting when the actors can legitimately act in the game rules simultaneously, as opposed to chess where you can just lock down state.
So there's multiple ways of so this example that I put here. So the more complex examples that we'd like to do are games that run on everybody's machines, the smart contracts and stuff like that. That stuff's hard, right? The simpler version that we can also do faster is you can still do the old school mud thing where you can connect with your DID to a specific realm, right? And that your identity, if you log into another server, somebody will still know that it's you who's a friend with you, right?
But we have this to be able to work on. It does work on multiple devices. The problem is that it is extremely resource hard when you've got like about 50 people, to basically distribute all the events to all the other services and stuff. But there's been recent advancements in peer-to-peer combined with some ordering things where we might actually be able to get the ordering right, which is what breaks.
So in the last couple of years, I have learned an enormous amount about distributed computing and all the problems in terms of ordering, consistency. So even a protocol like Paxos, which is so complex, nobody except Leslie Lamport thinks they understand it, does not have a liveness proof. In other words, you have an unbounded wait time before you get an answer. I mean, so some of the things you want to do are extremely hard on an open network.
So I'm not suggesting that we have to solve the extremely hard problems either. So we can. So one of the advantages of using linked data is that you can have different, each one of the, sorry, I accidentally jumped away from the tab that's rolling. You can have each one of the tabs could actually connect to a different protocol in a certain sense, where you've got a different stream of events, right? So we could start out with the dumbest stream imaginable, which is where you still have the client-server model. It's still peer-to-peer, right? Let's say we use Tor.onion addresses, right? Anybody can run a Tor onion address from any device, right? And you can still spin up a server and ask your friends to connect to it, right? And that one is still the classic mud. You connect. You don't have any concerns about ordering. But then, once we get that shit working, we can work on the more complicated protocol, and this type of interface could have a wolf, right? So that could be a plugin.
The point I wanted to make was that the startup I'm working for has designed a data center fabric that can get around those problems because we've changed the assumptions underneath the proofs of impossibility. So we have certain features in our fabric. You could do this in a data center. You couldn't do it in the original.
So, any comments from anybody who has not yet commented yet? I'm curious what people think about this. So does anybody here have, does anybody here think that this is actually a good and feasible idea? I mean, obviously, me. Does anybody here think this is I'm out of my mind? Feel free to raise your hand. So we don't have anybody who thinks I'm out of my mind, but, well, maybe you.
I'm just thinking, if this was a commercial product, which is where you are, right? It's something that you buy this game or buy that game, but today you buy this one.
Well, I'm interested.
I'm interested. Not precisely that. What I'm more interested in is I've got a really cool room.
Right. Yeah.
And you're going to set up a lightning channel, and you're going to pay 0.3% of 1%. You're going to pay 5 Satoshi for it. A fraction of a penny. So participate in my room. That's
the position of the mind as a user. What am I getting here? And the closest that I can think of, this is a browser.
Well, right. I mean, it has a browser tab, and in a certain sense, it's also a browser to a social environment.
Yes. And so I think when you encompass from a product perspective, you said, so let's just use Chrome as browser. Because you can do all of it in Chrome.
No, you can't do all of this in Chrome, actually. So, because you don't have the safety, and you also don't have a